John Whitaker had lived all his life on the edge of the Arizona plains. A vast stretch of land where the wind whispered through the tall grasses and the sun painted golden streaks across the horizon. His farm, modest but sturdy, had been in his family for generations. And from a young age, John had learned that life here demanded patience, hard work, and quiet endurance. Every morning he woke before the first light of dawn, hearing the soft call of the roosters and the distant cry of coyotes as the night slowly surrendered to day. The routine had become second nature to him, almost like breathing, and yet underneath the rhythm of his days, there was a deep sense of emptiness that he had long ignored. John had been married once, a long time ago. His wife, Margaret, had been a lively, warm-hearted woman who brought laughter and light into his life. But her time had been cruelly short. She fell ill when their children were still very young. Despite John's desperate prayers and care, she passed away, leaving him alone with memories and a farm that demanded constant attention. The grief had been overwhelming at first, an unshakable weight pressing down on his chest. Over time, he buried his sorrow under endless work, hoping that the soil, the crops, and the animals could fill the void that life had carved into his heart. The farm became his world. Each day, he woke early to tend to the animals, feeding the chickens, milking the cows, checking the fences to make sure no wandering cattle strayed too far. He planted crops with careful hands, tilling the earth with the same precision he had learned from his father and grandfather before him. Each seed he planted was a promise, a small act of hope that the land would reward his labor. But though the farm thrived under his care, John's own spirit had grown quiet and isolated. Conversations with neighbors were rare, and social visits were almost non-existent. In his solitude, he had grown accustomed to the silence, letting it wrap around him like a familiar blanket. Evenings were the hardest. The sun would dip behind the distant hills, casting long shadows over the fields. And John would sit on the porch, rocking slowly in his chair. He would listen to the wind rustling through the wheat and barley, watch the fireflies blink like tiny stars across the yard. Sometimes, just sometimes, he would think about Margaret. He remembered her laughter, the way her hand felt in his, and the gentle strength she carried in everything she did. Those memories brought both comfort and sorrow. He had loved her with all his heart, and yet after she was gone, he had told himself that life must go on without such tenderness. Years passed, and John's life became a steady, unchanging rhythm. He found solace in the simplicity of his routine. The animals needed care, the crops demanded attention, and the land, stubborn and unpredictable, kept him busy enough to forget the ache inside him. He grew skilled at his work, respected for his diligence, and admired by those who knew him. But beneath the surface, there was an emptiness that no amount of labor could fill. The evenings remained quiet. The meals were eaten alone. The silence in the farmhouse seemed heavier than the walls themselves. Friends came and went. Neighbors offered help when storms or droughts threatened. But intimacy, the warmth of a shared glance, a comforting touch. A gentle voice was something John had not felt in years. He had accepted his loneliness as a fact of life, believing that people like him were meant to live quietly, without love or companionship. He told himself that he had a purpose, and that purpose was the farm. The land was alive, and caring for it was enough. Yet, there were moments when he would pause mid-task, leaning against the handle of his spade or the railing of the porch, and wonder what it would be like to share his life with someone again. Would it be strange? Would it be frightening? Could a heart that had been broken once even bear the weight of love again? John did not know, and so he buried these questions deep, letting the dust of the fields and the routine of chores sweep them away. Despite the quietness of his life, John had a deep connection to the world around him. He knew the weather by the smell in the air and the way the clouds moved across the sky. He could predict when rain was coming by the behavior of the birds. He understood the language of the land in ways that few could. Seasons dictated his actions, and he respected their power. Spring brought the planting of crops, summer, the careful tending of growth, autumn, the harvest, and winter, a time to repair fences, mend tools, and plan for the year to come. Every season was a teacher, and John was a dedicated student, learning patience, resilience, and the quiet rewards of hard work, even in this solitary existence. There were small moments that stirred something in him, subtle reminders of life beyond work. He would watch the deer cautiously step out of the forest at dawn, their graceful movements reminding him of beauty in the simple things. The night sky, filled with stars too numerous to count, would leave him in awe of the vastness of the world and the tiny place he occupied in it. Occasionally, a neighbor's child would run by the fence, waving energetically, and he would find himself smiling in a way he had almost forgotten he could. These little sparks of life were fleeting, but they reminded him that the world was not entirely empty, that connection, even if distant, still existed. And yet John remained alone. Friends and relatives would suggest that he remarry, or at least seek companionship, but he would shake his head. "The farm keeps me company," he would say with a small, rueful smile. People did not understand the depth of his solitude, the way he had learned to measure life by work and seasons, by the rhythm of the land and the quiet of the evenings. He was a man who had built walls around his heart, not out of bitterness, but out of survival. Love, he believed, was a risk, and he was too cautious or perhaps too wary to take it again. Yet, deep down, something in John still yearned. There was a small, persistent whisper in his mind, a curiosity about what it might feel like to share a smile, a conversation, a touch with another human being. He did not speak of it, did not act on it, but sometimes, as he walked through the fields at sunset, he would imagine what life might be like if someone were there beside him, not just a worker or a neighbor, but a companion, a friend, a presence that made the solitude sweeter, the work lighter, and the world brighter. Little did John know that the quiet, predictable life he had built for himself was about to change. The farm, which had been his sanctuary, was about to witness something new, something that would stir his heart and awaken feelings he thought he had long forgotten. A presence would enter his life, bringing warmth, curiosity, and the gentle, subtle magic of human connection. And though John did not yet know it, the world he had accepted as unchanging and solitary was about to open its doors to the possibility of love once more. For now, John continued his work, tending to the land with the same care he had always given it. The sun rose and set, the seasons turned, and the farm thrived under his hands. He rose each morning with delight, performed his tasks with quiet dedication, and watched the stars each night with a sense of calm. Life, in all its simplicity and solitude, continued as it always had. Yet, beneath the surface, a small seed of hope had been planted, waiting patiently for the right moment to grow. And that moment, though unseen and unimagined, was drawing closer with every passing day. One late afternoon, as John Whitaker worked on repairing a fence along the far edge of his property, he noticed movement in the distance. A figure was walking along the dusty trail that led to the farm. At first, he thought it might be one of the neighbors or a traveler passing through. But as the figure drew closer, he realized it was someone entirely unexpected. She was an Apache woman, moving with the quiet confidence of someone used to walking in the open fields and forests. Her long hair was dark and shone in the late afternoon sun, her eyes calm but alert. And her presence somehow commanded attention without a word. John watched her for a moment, leaning on his fence post. He was not used to seeing strangers near his land, and the sight of her stirred something he had not felt in years. A mixture of curiosity, caution, and a faint thrill of anticipation. The woman smiled slightly as she approached, polite but reserved, and John felt an unfamiliar pull at his chest. A gentle tug of recognition that there was something different about her. He straightened his shoulders, adjusting to the unexpected situation, and called out, "Hello there. Can I help you?" The woman stopped a few steps away, brushing the dust from her clothing, and looked at him with steady eyes. "My name is Ayana," she said softly. Her voice carried warmth, a gentle tone that immediately calmed the tension in John's chest. "I am looking for work. I can help with the farm, or with chores. I only need a place to stay for a little while." John studied her carefully. He was wary of strangers. Years of solitary life had taught him that, but something about her demeanor was different. There was honesty in her eyes, a quiet strength, and a sense of dignity that made him trust her instinctively. "Well," he said, scratching the back of his neck, "I don't usually take on help, but you can stay in the small room above the barn. And you can help with chores if you want." Ayana's face lit up with a gentle smile. "Thank you," she said simply. "I will do my best." From that moment on, life at the farm began to change, though John did not yet realize how profoundly. Ayana moved through the farmhouse with an ease that was both practical and graceful. She began by helping John in the fields, guiding the animals to fresh pastures, feeding chickens, and repairing fences. She had a quiet efficiency, a natural rhythm to her movements that reminded John of the way the wind shaped the tall grasses or the way the sun slowly shifted across the sky. Even the smallest tasks seemed lighter and more pleasant with her presence. At first, their conversations were brief and functional, centered on work and the needs of the farm. John gave instructions. Ayana followed them, and they shared occasional words of encouragement. But slowly, their interactions began to take on a deeper, more personal tone. She asked questions about his life, about the farm, and about the land. She listened when he spoke, nodding thoughtfully, never interrupting, always present. John found himself speaking more freely than he had in years, telling her stories about the animals, the crops, and even about Margaret, his late wife. He did not realize how comforting it was to have someone listen, truly listen, to his words and his memories. Ayana, in turn, shared small pieces of her own life. She spoke of her family, of the traditions and customs of the Apache people, and of the land she had grown up on. She described the dances, the songs, and the stories that had been passed down through generations. John found himself fascinated by her knowledge and by the quiet pride she carried in her heritage. It was unlike anything he had ever known, a connection to history, to culture, and to life itself that felt both foreign and familiar at the same time. As the days passed, John began to notice more subtle things about Ayana. The way her hands worked with such care, whether she was planting seeds or mending fences, the way she moved with confidence, never hurried, yet always efficient. The way her laughter could rise unexpectedly, soft and musical, filling the farmhouse with warmth. These little details, small as they were, began to stir feelings in John that he had long thought dormant. He found himself looking forward to seeing her in the morning, waiting for her to arrive at the fields, and feeling a strange flutter of excitement when their eyes met. At first, John tried to dismiss these feelings. He told himself that he was simply grateful for the help, or that he was appreciating the human company after so many years alone. But deep down, he knew it was more than that. There was something in the way she made him feel alive again, a sense of hope and curiosity that he had not experienced since Margaret's passing. He realized, slowly and almost reluctantly, that he had been lonely for far longer than he had allowed himself to admit. One evening, after a long day of work under the blazing sun, John and Ayana sat on the porch together. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, the wind carrying the faint scent of wildflowers from the distant fields. They did not speak for a long time, simply enjoying the quiet companionship. Then, as if sensing the right moment, Ayana reached over and brushed a strand of dust-covered hair from John's forehead. The gesture was gentle, almost instinctive, but it carried with it a tenderness that made John's heart beat faster, for the first time in years. John realized the profound effect of human touch. It was not just the movement of her hand, it was the care behind it, the subtle warmth, and the silent message of attention and kindness. Ayana did not need to speak. The touch alone conveyed more than words ever could. John felt a mixture of surprise and gratitude, a recognition that life could still offer moments of unexpected beauty, even for someone who had resigned himself to solitude as the weeks turned into months. Ayana's presence became an integral part of John's daily life. She was there to help with the farm, to share meals, and to provide company during the long, quiet evenings. They began to develop a rhythm together, a subtle dance of cooperation and mutual respect. John taught her the finer points of farming while she shared her knowledge of the land, the animals, and even the stars. They would often stand together in the fields, watching the sky change color, and share observations in a way that deepened their connection without the need for grand gestures or elaborate words. There were challenges, of course. John had lived a life of routine and solitude, and opening himself to someone new was not easy. He struggled with vulnerability, with admitting that he needed another person in his life in ways he had not acknowledged for decades. Yet, Ayana's patience and understanding made the process easier. She never pushed him, never demanded attention or affection. Instead, she allowed their relationship to develop naturally. Through shared work, shared meals, and shared moments of quiet reflection, it was in these small, seemingly insignificant moments that John's heart began to awaken. A smile exchanged across a field, a laugh shared over a spilled bucket of water, or the simple act of handing him a towel after a long day in the sun. All of these gestures carried meaning. They reminded John that connection was possible, that trust could be rebuilt, and that love, in its gentle, patient form, could find him even in the most unexpected of places. By the time the harvest season arrived, John could no longer deny the impact Ayana had on his life. The farm, once a place of routine and solitude, had become alive with companionship and warmth. He felt lighter, more at peace, and surprisingly more hopeful about the future. Her presence had brought a new rhythm to his days, a sense of anticipation and joy that he had long thought impossible. John began to understand that the bond they were forming was not just about help on the farm or passing the time. It was about human connection, about sharing life's burdens and joys with someone who respected and cared for him. He began to cherish her laughter, her stories, and the way she seemed to notice the small details in life, the way the clouds shifted in the evening sky, or how the chickens behaved when rain approached. Through her eyes, he began to see the farm and the world around him with fresh appreciation. As the sun set on a crisp autumn evening, John found himself standing beside Ayana on the porch. Watching the last rays of sunlight fade into the horizon, there was a comfortable silence between them, filled with unspoken understanding. Their hands brushed again, and John felt a warmth spread through him that he had long thought lost. In that moment, he realized that life could be full of surprises, that the human heart was capable of renewal, and that he had never truly known the profound comfort and joy of companionship. Till now, the arrival of Ayana had shifted John's world in subtle but profound ways. She had come to his farm seeking work, a place to stay, and a simple exchange of labor. What she brought in return was far greater: warmth, connection, and a gentle awakening of emotions he thought were buried forever. John had spent years in solitude, believing that love and closeness were things of the past. But Ayana's presence proved otherwise. By the time the stars filled the night sky, John understood that something important had begun. The farm, which had been his sanctuary of solitude, was now a place of shared life and mutual care. He was no longer simply surviving. He was experiencing life with renewed curiosity, gratitude, and the quiet thrill of unexpected companionship. And though the future remained uncertain, he knew that he had found a presence in his life that was both rare and precious, someone whose touch, laughter, and presence had begun to fill the empty spaces of his heart. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, John Whitaker began to notice a change in himself that he could not ignore. Life on the farm, which had once been a predictable rhythm of work and solitude, now carried a new energy. The presence of Ayana, the Apache woman who had arrived unexpectedly, had quietly begun to transform him. It was not a sudden change, but rather a gentle awakening, like the slow bloom of flowers in spring after a long, cold winter. John found that he looked forward to her company more than he had anticipated. He noticed the smallest details about her, the things he had once overlooked in the routine of life. The way her dark hair shimmered under the morning sun, the way her hands moved skillfully when she worked with the animals, and the gentle, musical quality of her laughter. All of these began to linger in his thoughts long after the day was done. He realized with a mixture of surprise and wonder that he had never truly appreciated the presence of another person in this way. It had been so long since he had felt such warmth and connection that he could barely remember what it felt like. Ayana's impact on the farm extended far beyond her labor. She brought a sense of order, care, and joy that John had not realized he was missing. Meals became shared experiences rather than solitary routines. Evenings, once spent in silence, were now filled with conversation, laughter, and the gentle exchange of stories. Ayanna had a gift for noticing the subtle beauty in the world around them, and she shared it freely. She would point out the way the sunlight hit the leaves in a particular way, or the way the clouds formed strange shapes in the evening sky. These small observations, simple as they were, made John see the world differently. He began to notice details he had long taken for granted: the flight of birds at sunset, the shimmer of dew on the grass in the early morning, and the intricate patterns in the bark of the old oak trees near the creek as their bond grew. John found himself opening up in ways he had never done with anyone else since Margaret's passing. He spoke of his past, of memories he had long held close, and of the loneliness that had once seemed permanent. Ayanna listened without judgment, never interrupting, offering only her presence and understanding. It was in her quiet attentiveness that John found a safe space to reveal his emotions, a place where vulnerability was met with respect and care. Ayanna shared her own experiences as well, but in her own gentle way. She spoke of her family, the traditions of her Apache heritage, and the deep connection she felt to the land and her people. Her stories were not just tales of the past, they were lessons, reflections, and moments of wisdom that resonated deeply with John. He was fascinated by her perspective on life, by the way she viewed the world not as something to be controlled, but as something to be understood and respected. Through her, John began to see that there were ways of living and being that he had never considered, and that life could be richer, deeper, and more connected than he had ever imagined. It was not just her words, however, that affected him. It was the simple, everyday gestures that began to stir emotions he had long buried. Ayanna would place a comforting hand on his shoulder when he was tired, or offer a gentle smile when he spoke of worries about the farm. She would laugh at small mistakes, like a spilled bucket of water, not with mockery, but with warmth that made John feel lighter. The touch of her hand, the subtle attention in her eyes, the sound of her voice, they were all awakening feelings in John that he had thought were lost forever. Despite this growing connection, John struggled with his own vulnerability. He had spent so many years alone that the idea of opening his heart fully to someone new was frightening. He worried that he might fail, that he might cause pain, or that he might be hurt again. Yet Ayanna's patience never wavered. She allowed him to approach their relationship at his own pace, never pressing, never demanding. She understood without words the depth of his past sorrow and the carefulness required to trust again. One crisp autumn evening, after the day's work in the fields had ended, John and Ayanna sat together on the porch, wrapped in the quiet comfort of each other's presence. The sky was painted in shades of red and gold, and the wind carried the subtle scent of the turning season. For a long while, they spoke of trivial things: the shape of the clouds, the behavior of the livestock, and the plans for the next day. Then a silence fell, not awkward or tense, but filled with unspoken understanding. John felt a stirring in his chest, a warmth that spread slowly as he became aware of the depth of his feelings. Ayanna, sensing the moment, reached over and gently touched his hand. It was a simple gesture, almost fleeting, yet it carried with it a depth of meaning that John could not ignore. The warmth of her skin, the softness of her touch, and the unspoken reassurance in her gesture made his heart beat faster. For the first time in decades, he felt seen, appreciated, and understood in a way that went beyond words. That single touch became a symbol of connection, of trust, and of the possibility of love. From that evening on, John began to embrace the emotions he had long kept hidden. He allowed himself to enjoy her company without fear, to laugh freely, to share his thoughts and dreams without restraint. Their relationship deepened naturally, built on shared experiences, mutual respect, and a growing affection that neither of them rushed to define. It was a bond that did not need grand gestures or declarations. It was a quiet, steady understanding that developed through daily life and small acts of care. John also began to notice changes in himself beyond emotional awakening. He became more attentive to the land, more thoughtful in his decisions, and more present in each moment. The farm, once a place of routine, had become a space of joy and discovery. Tasks that had once felt like labor now carried a sense of purpose and satisfaction. Enriched by the shared effort and companionship, even the simplest chores became opportunities for connection, whether it was mending fences together, tending to the garden, or preparing meals. Ayana's influence extended to the evenings as well. She encouraged John to look beyond the farm, to notice the beauty in the world and in small moments of life. They would sit under the stars, sharing observations about the constellations, talking about dreams, or simply enjoying the quiet together. These moments of reflection allowed John to reconnect, not just with another human being, but with himself and with the natural world. He realized that life was not just about survival or work, it was about noticing, appreciating, and sharing the world with others. One day, as they worked side by side in the fields, John caught himself stealing glances at Ayana, noticing the way her eyes sparkled in the sunlight and the gentle determination in her movements. He realized that he was no longer simply observing her as a helper or guest. He was seeing her as someone extraordinary, someone whose presence enriched his life in ways he had not anticipated. It was a revelation that both thrilled and frightened him, for he had not allowed himself to feel such intensity in many years. In time, John began to embrace the idea that love, in its quiet and patient form, could exist even in his life. He understood that it was not about grand declarations or dramatic gestures, but about consistency, care, and shared moments that built trust and affection over time. He saw that Ayana's presence was not just filling a gap in his life, it was transforming it, teaching him that the human heart was capable of renewal, no matter the years that had passed by the end of the season. John's farm had changed almost as much as he had. The fields were flourishing, the animals were well cared for, and the farmhouse was alive with warmth and companionship. The silence that had once dominated the evenings was replaced with laughter, conversation, and the soft comfort of shared presence. John realized that he was no longer alone, not truly. He had someone beside him, someone who cared for him, and someone whose touch, words, and presence had begun to awaken emotions he had thought were lost. John knew that the journey was not over. He still had fears, uncertainties, and moments of doubt, but he had also discovered hope, trust, and the beginnings of love. Ayana had come into his life seeking work, but she had given him something far greater, a reminder that life could still surprise, heal, and enrich the heart. And for John, who had spent so many years in solitude, the quiet awakening of his emotions was both exhilarating and humbling. In the quiet of the Arizona evenings, as the sun dipped behind the distant hills and the stars began to twinkle in the clear sky, John often reflected on the transformation that had begun. He realized that life, in its unpredictable ways, had brought Ayana to his farm not just as a helper, but as a companion, a teacher, and a presence that reminded him of the beauty of human connection. For the first time in many years, John felt truly alive, not just surviving, feeling, noticing, and appreciating the depth of emotions that came with companionship and trust. The arrival of spring brought more than just new growth to John Whitaker's farm. It brought a quiet, steady sense of renewal to his life. After months of working alongside Ayana, sharing stories, laughter, and simple daily tasks, John felt a warmth in his heart that he had long thought impossible. Life, which had once been measured only by chores and routine, now carried a richness that came from shared experiences and genuine companionship. Every morning, he woke with a sense of anticipation, wondering what small joys the day might bring and feeling grateful that Ayana was by his side to share them. Their days began before sunrise. They tended to the farm together. John no longer saw these tasks as merely labor. They were moments of connection. They fed the chickens, guided the cattle to fresh pastures, and mended fences together, their movements in harmony as if the farm itself had adjusted to the rhythm of their partnership. Ayana had a way of noticing what needed attention before John even saw it. Whether it was a weak fence post or a patch of soil needing extra care, her insight, combined with her quiet confidence, made him respect her even more. But it was not just her skill that affected him, it was the care she poured into every action. It's the subtle tenderness that made each gesture feel meaningful. Evenings became their favorite time. After the work was done and the animals settled for the night, they would sit on the porch together, sometimes in companionable silence, other times in easy conversation. They spoke of dreams, hopes, and small joys. John told Ayanna about his late wife Margaret, sharing memories he had not spoken aloud in years. And Ayanna listened with patience and understanding. In turn, she shared stories of her childhood, of her people, and of the wisdom that had been passed down to her. Through these exchanges, John discovered not just her past, but also a perspective on life that was different from his own, a perspective that valued harmony, patience, and the deep connection between humans and the land, as the bond between them deepened. John found himself experiencing emotions he had long buried. He realized that love was not something confined to grand gestures or fleeting passionate. It could be quiet, steady, and patient. It was in the way Ayanna smiled when he successfully fixed a broken gate, the way she reached for his hand when he seemed tired, and the way her laughter filled the farmhouse with warmth. These small moments carried more weight than he had ever imagined, and slowly, he allowed himself to embrace them. One particularly warm afternoon, as they were tending to the garden together. A soft breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers across the field. John looked at Ayanna as she leaned down to water the plants, her hair catching the sunlight, and he felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Here was a woman who had come to his farm as a stranger, yet she had become the center of his world. He realized that life had given him a second chance at companionship, a chance to experience love, trust, and warmth once again. He was not just surviving anymore, he was truly living. The transformation was not limited to John alone. Ayanna also found comfort and belonging in the farm. She appreciated the steady rhythm of life, the respect John showed for the land, and the sincerity he carried in every action. She felt that this was a place where she was valued, not just for her labor, but for who she was as a person. Their connection grew stronger because it was rooted in mutual respect, understanding, and a shared commitment to the life they were building together. John's friends and neighbors began to notice the change as well. Where once he had been solitary, now he appeared lighter, more animated, and more present in his interactions. His smiles came more easily, and his laughter, once rare, now echoed across the farmyard. People remarked on how happy he seemed, though he never fully explained the source of his joy. It was not something he needed to explain, he knew it was the bond he shared with Ayanna. The quiet understanding and care that had grown between them over time. Even the land itself seemed to respond to this new energy. Crops flourished under their combined attention. The animals were healthy and calm, and the farmhouse felt alive in a way it had not for years. John often found himself marveling at the subtle beauty of their surroundings, the way the sunlight danced across the fields, the gentle rustle of the trees in the evening breeze, and the soft glow of the moon over the horizon. These moments, once unnoticed in the routine of life, now carried a special significance, reminding him that life was full of wonder when shared with someone who cared. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, John realized that he had come to understand the true meaning of connection. It was not just about companionship. It was about presence, trust, and the quiet joy of sharing everyday moments with someone who mattered. He felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that he could finally open his heart without fear, that he could experience tenderness and intimacy once again. Ayanna's hand rested lightly on his, and in that simple touch, he felt a lifetime of loneliness melt away. As the months continued, their relationship grew stronger and more comfortable. They celebrated small victories together, like a particularly successful harvest or a repaired fence that had held against a storm. They supported each other during challenges, or whether it was an unexpected illness in the livestock or a sudden change in weather that threatened the crops. Through it all, they discovered the strength that comes from partnership and the joy that comes from mutual care. John began to understand that life was not meant to be faced alone. The years he had spent in solitude had taught him discipline and resilience. But it was the shared experiences with Ayanna that brought true fulfillment. He learned that love could be quiet, patient, and steady, and that it did not require grand gestures to be meaningful. It was in the everyday acts of care, the shared laughter, and the moments of quiet understanding that love truly revealed itself. Ayanna also found herself transformed by this life. She appreciated the stability and peace that John offered, the way he respected her presence and allowed her to be herself. She felt a sense of belonging she had never experienced before, and through their connection, she discovered that trust and companionship could bring a quiet happiness that was both grounding and uplifting. Together, they built a life that balanced work, care, and moments of shared joy, a life that neither had anticipated but both cherished deeply as the seasons changed once more. John and Ayanna settled into a rhythm that was uniquely their own. They faced challenges, as all life does, but they faced them together, drawing strength from each other. The farm became not just a place of labor, but a sanctuary of shared life, love, and quiet contentment. The farmhouse, once silent and empty, was now filled with warmth, laughter, and the sense of two hearts growing together. John often reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. He realized that life had a way of surprising even those who believed they were set in their ways. Ayanna had entered his world as a stranger, seeking work and shelter, but she had given him far more than he had ever imagined. She had brought companionship, warmth, and a gentle awakening of the heart. In return, he offered her respect, care, and the stability of a life rooted in love for the land and for her. Together, they had discovered a partnership that went beyond words, a connection built on trust, respect, and shared experience. By the time another year had passed, John could not remember the days when he had felt alone. His heart, once heavy with grief and loneliness, had been renewed by Ayanna's presence. The farm, which had once been a place of routine and solitude, had become a place of life, laughter, and deep connection. They had transformed each other's lives, proving that love could arrive unexpectedly, heal old wounds, and bring joy even after years of quiet solitude in the quiet of the evenings. Under the starlit sky that had once been his only companion, John now sat beside Ayanna with a full heart. He held her hand, felt the warmth of her presence, and knew that he had finally found what he had been missing all those years, a bond that was steady, tender, and enduring. Together, they had discovered that life, even in its simplicity and quiet, could hold profound beauty when shared with someone who truly mattered. The farm thrived. The animals were content, and the land responded to their care. But it was the human connection between John and Ayanna that truly transformed everything. Their shared life was filled with small joys, quiet victories, and moments of tenderness that made each day meaningful. John realized that he had never truly known the depth of a woman's touch, of companionship, or of shared joy until Ayanna came into his life. And from that day forward, he vowed to cherish every moment of this second chance at life, love, and happiness, knowing that it was a gift that would stay with him forever.